Hi there. Continuing a conversation about the correlation between sex and sexuality and how we birth. I listened to an amazing podcast on the birth queens with Anna Verwal, who is, among other things, a student of pre- and perinatal psychology and a birth educator, coming from that perspective that our experience of being born leaves huge imprints on our behavior. It's sort of the first attachment imprint. And what that means is it sets the tone for how we perceive the world to be and how we behave in relationships. So I know most people, at least in my experience, don't know their birth story, or maybe only know a very small piece of it. And a generalization about birth in Western American culture, I think, is that it's sort of treated as this thing that you just get through, right? It's something you have to get through, and then, you have a healthy baby, and that's what matters, and so let's just put it behind us, which is traumatizing to treat this event, something of such magnitude, as just something you have to kind of like grit your teeth and get through. Especially when there is very likely, dare I say guaranteed, to be a moment of like intergenerational healing potential in the experience of birth. So let me back up a little bit and go back to the sex part. When we're born, particularly the time before we're born, leading up to when we're born, gestation and preparing to be born, there is a chemical relationship between mom and baby. So baby is soaking in the environment of mom's emotional body, soaking in her hormone production, whether that's high levels of cortisol or lots of oxytocin. We know that our mental behavior impacts our nervous system impacts our hormone production, and all of this is fed to the baby. Now, this is not like a scare tactic or anything. It's simply how things work. And there is the suggestion from the tradition of Ayurveda and other indigenous traditions that we choose our parents. So in some sense, there is a purposefulness to whatever environment we find ourselves in as yet to be born babies. But take into consideration for a moment your own intuition, your own felt sense, or maybe your concrete knowledge of what pregnancy and birth were like for your mother and how that may have impacted you. And then this experience of medicalized hospital birth, most likely, where everything is being watched, timed, monitored, assessed, analyzed, judged, and decisions are made based on not what you needed as a baby, not what your mom needed to really get ready for this magnificent event, but what the hospital has decided is a good amount of time. I know I said I was going to talk about sex, and I am not there yet. So whatever your experience of being born was, right? Maybe you felt rushed. Maybe there was a lot of chaos in the end. Every hospital birth I've attended, there tends to be a lot of chaos in the end. Everybody's rushing around and, multiple people touching mom and baby pretty aggressively. And this is our first experience of the world and how it's going to be for us. And the likelihood of entering into a relationship where there's a little bit of a sense of pressure or performance or, lay here and let me do this to you is very high. I don't know many people who haven't had at least some time in their sexual past where there was a little bit or a lot of going through the motions and kind of operating under this veil of, this is how it's supposed to be, even if it doesn't feel quite right. And with regards to sex and sexuality, if you're a person with a vulva, perhaps you've had the experience of intellectually feeling like this is okay, this is how it goes, but your body is not quote unquote performing. So there's pain, or there's dryness, or there's no orgasm. And part of this is it's very layered and complicated. There's a cultural pattern that's been instilled in us of like everybody operates on the typically a male person's arousal trajectory, which is quite fast and explosive, no pun intended. And people with vulvas tend to have a much slower arousal arc, up to 45 minutes to be engorged, which is when, your internal body is puffy and lubricated and it feels really good. Granted, you have to feel safe and some level of desire to be where you are doing what you're doing for that to happen. But again, how much override is just part of what's happening, part of how you've learned to be in your body. Override, or even like skip the whole part of figuring out what you want because masturbation was talked about as dirty and you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't touch yourself. It's complicated, right? And then imagine, this whole experience we've had of our genitals and being in our body in a vulnerable way. There's no more vulnerable way of being with our genitals than childbirth. And the typical scenario, how it's been medicalized, is lay on your back, put your feet in these stirrups, and multiple people are going to stand over you and tell you what to do. Now, I recognize that is triggering for most people. I think it should be. Not that I wanted to do harm by saying that, but this is how it's done. And again, there's so much override, like they know what they're doing, this is how it's done, this is how it's safe, but it feels terrible. And oh, guess what? My body's not performing. The contractions have slowed down, or, spaced out way too far, or I'm not dilating, and now I have to, all sorts of things at the end that lead to intervention after intervention. And to be clear, I need to clarify this, because this is not about any experience being wrong. It's about the potency of these experiences and bringing consciousness to our experiences. Because I do believe, to a certain degree, there's a power in finding ourselves in a situation that is disempowering or that didn't go at all the way we would have hoped, and allowing that to be a spark inside of us to speak up or become an advocate, to make changes in our life and in our relationships. And if you are pregnant or want to be, how you relate to sexuality and communicating your needs and boundaries is fundamental to, I say success, but perhaps with a different meaning than you might hear it, the success of your birth experience, meaning it's something that transforms you and elevates you to a higher state of consciousness, to just go there. There is no one way that our sexual encounters, our pregnancies, our birth experiences, there's no one way that they're supposed to go. There's a way that's going to be transformative for you based on these initial pre-birth and birth imprints. And so call your mom today and ask about what it was like when you were born. Feel that in your body. Take a few deep breaths. Generally, the correlations between how it was and how it's showing up in your life now are pretty obvious. You'll just feel it ripple through your body. You might not be able to articulate it. That's not important. But listen to what's moving through you, what's latent inside of you, and use it. Use it to empower your birth.